Aloha and welcome to the video. So I got a recent order in from a client. I'm going to be making a few pieces, 2 pahoa or daggers, a ihe or short spear, and a knuckle duster. The build process for most of it's kind of the same, and so I'm really only going to be showcasing the spear, which is what this marlin bill right here is for. This is a larger marlin bill, and so I'm going to be jointing this to the body of a koa piece, and then it'll be a short spear or ihe. Short spears are usually 4 to 6 feet long, and then the pololu or the long spear is usually around anywhere between 10 to 14 feet, almost like a pike. The joining method that I'm going to use here is going to be tongue and groove. I recently got asked why do I use tongue and groove rather than mortise and tenon. The primary reason is because to do a mortise and tenon, one section insets into the other section, and so if I'm cutting the outer edges of the marlin bill and I just have the core is not as strong, it's more brittle. I could inset the koa wood into the marlin bill, but that'd be really hard to get a good fit without risking damaging the bill, because you're going to be applying pressure from the inside pushing out, and the bill's not naturally designed for that kind of pressure, and so there's a good chance you'd fracture it. So using a tight tongue and groove joint here, I still have the exterior body of the marlin bill on the 2 sides of the bill, and at the same time I have quite a bit of material joining between the 2 of the koa wood and the bill, and so it just makes for a good kind of happy medium. If I was concerned more about additional strength on it, I might make the joint a little bit longer, and then the lashing mixed with the joint and a cross peg, it's gonna be in there solid. You probably would break a piece of the bill before the joint would break out, which I've actually done before. I've thought about that. I've thought about testing one of my smaller kind, the pahoa, the daggers, just to see how strong I can make the joint. So maybe I'll do that in a later video. So this next step here is just gluing the joint together. I'm using just a 20-minute epoxy. I do let it sit overnight to make sure it's completely cured, and the painter's tape just helps keep it in place. The primary securing method though is going to be a combination between that really tight-fitting joint that I had and then a cross peg. Obviously the epoxy assists in making that joint strong as well. Before I get to shaping on the piece though, I'm going to go ahead and drill this 1/4 inch hole for the cross peg. It's easier to do that while the body of the spear is still kind of square like that, just because it's easier to keep it in line when I drill it. And then once I have the cross peg in place, I can go ahead and start shaping on it. Usually I will use epoxy rather than wood glue, but that's because normally I fill the core of the marlin bill with epoxy to help seal it, but this core here was almost solid bone. It was a larger bill, and it was cut down to the point where it's pretty much solid bone going from the section where it's jointed all the way to the tip, and so there really isn't any epoxy that's in there, and so I figured it'd be a little bit better hold if I use wood glue, and the peg will just adhere really well to either sides of the tongue and groove joint. But now that I have that in place, I let it sit for maybe an hour. I don't have to let it sit for very long, just because the joint's being held pretty securely as is, and I can just start shaping. If I had a lathe, it'd probably be a lot easier to shape this. I don't have a lathe, so I do it by hand, which is kind of funny because it'd be similar to what you do traditionally. Traditionally, they would scrape the surface with probably like rocks or shells, and they might use an adase or koi to hog away some chunks of material, but then they would shape by scraping. And so ironically I'm using a power tool, but the way that I'm shaping it is kind of similar. How I round is I do take the corners down first, so it kind of makes like a hexagon or octagon depending on how many sides I've now created, and then I start twisting. So as I move my angle grinder across the body of the spear, you can see my left hand there, I'm twisting the spear back and forth, and that helps to round as I remove material. And then every so often I take a step back and I check balance. I can see it's still a little bit back heavy. It's not quite center balance yet. But I still have some more material to remove, so it's not too bad. It does feel good in the hands though, so I'm so far liking its length. I'm liking its weight. Just gonna remove a little bit more weight and push the weight a little bit more towards the back. That way it's more evenly balanced. And so from this point forward, I'm done with the angle grinder, and it's all going to be sanding. I'm going to start with 150 grit, which is a coarser grit, and then I'll be moving up to a 220 grit, and then a 320 grit. I don't think I'll take this piece past 320, just because of the nature of the piece. It is a really, really pretty koa wood. It's a dark koa. It's hard to tell now because of the lighting and the sand dust from sanding, but when I go to oil it, you'll see it's a really beautiful dark wood. It does have some curl to it, but it's not a large amount of curl, and so I think with the 320 it'll be just fine. The sanding on the bill takes forever. The bill is just really hard. I don't know if you remember, but in the beginning of the video the bill was really dark, now it's really light. The reason for that is I always remove the very, very outer edge of the bill where it's really bumpy and coarse. I usually remove it with the grinder, the angle grinder, and so I get some gouges from the angle grinder, lines that cut into it, and so the sand, I have to go back and sand it, and sanding it just takes forever because it's so hard. But while I was sanding it, I noticed that there was a couple small cracks, fissures. It's pretty common in the marlin bills, but what I'm going to do here is I'm filling that with glue and then using an accelerant to speed up how fast that glue sets. So this is just a super glue, a CA glue. It doesn't really add structural integrity. All it's doing is filling in those gaps. I don't want any gaps that lead to the center of the bill. A, because I don't want moisture to get inside of there, and B, I don't want bugs to find their way inside. I will be oiling the whole piece, so not just the body but the bill as well. But making sure that nothing can get in there is pretty important, especially with the natural materials. So I'm just going to finish sanding the entire thing down to 320. Takes quite a while, but now that I have it sanded, I can go ahead and start oiling. So I use tongue oil for anyone who hasn't seen my videos. It's my personal favorite, just because it doesn't add too much color. It's almost like a clear oil. It does a really good job though of accenting the natural grain of the wood, and so for that reason I really enjoy using it. You do have to let it sit usually a little bit longer so it doesn't set too fast. I usually let it sit for about a day, and then once complete, or by the next day, it's usually sealed up and doing a lot better. And then I am going to oil the bill just the same. This will help fill in all of the tiny little pores that are on the exterior of the bill and just help it last a lot longer. But you can really see that dark koa just looks absolutely gorgeous. I'm in love with it. Can't wait for this piece to be finished. So the next step here, again, I let it sit for a day, and you can see how it kind of darkened up a little bit more just as the tongue oil was setting in. But the next step is to put in the teeth, and so this is going to be a barbed spear. I'm going to be using tiger shark teeth. The first step is to mark and cut in the grooves that are going to go along the edges of the spear, or of the spear tip, the marlin bill. The key important thing here is making sure that the grooves match. If they're offset, if one side is higher or lower than the other side, it's super noticeable once you get the teeth into place. Like, you can't hide it. And it looks horrible. I have messed up and done that in the past where I just had like a massive offset, and I hated it so much that I made the grooves longer so that I could adjust the teeth and get them more in line. But oh man, it looks horrible. So I'm just cutting in these grooves with the Dremel. So this is a tungsten bit Dremel. I do cut it in by hand. I'm sure there's ways you could do it a little bit easier, but I've done it that way for the entire time that I've been making weapons, which is probably a good 10 years by now, maybe 12. It's been quite a while, But the next step after I cut in those grooves is putting in the teeth. I do lash the teeth, but I like to put the teeth in with a little bit of epoxy, not a lot, just a little. What this is going to do is it's going to make it easier afterwards to drill the teeth, drill the marlin bill, and lash everything together. And so it's just a nice time saver. This is all I had time for this week on this piece. I will be finishing it in the next video. Because I'm making a few other pieces at the same time, I can't spend as much time dedicating on this one, but we'll have it finished by next week. Mahalo plenty for everyone that joins and enjoys my videos. If you like watching these weapons, make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next video. Aloha.